After you finish listening to the story, don't forget to leave a comment about what you would have done in the character's place. Now, let's dive into the story. Thomas adjusted his tie in the mirror, taking a deep breath before grabbing his briefcase. The morning sun poured through the bedroom window, casting a golden glow on the neatly made bed. He glanced at his wife, Margot, who sat at her vanity, carefully applying a shade of lipstick that perfectly matched her soft pink blouse. "Big meeting today?" she asked, her voice smooth as silk. "Yeah. The investors are expecting results." He grabbed his coffee and took a sip, his eyes lingering on her reflection. "Dinner tonight. That little Italian place we love." Margot turned, flashing him the same dazzling smile that had first captivated him years ago. "Of course, darling. Wouldn't miss it." Thomas kissed her forehead and left the apartment, stepping into the bustling city streets. From the outside, they were the perfect couple, successful, attractive, deeply in love. But something had felt off lately. A certain distance in Margot's touch, a hesitation in her voice. Thomas shook off the thought. It was probably just work stress. A stranger in the shadows. Margot waited precisely 15 minutes after Thomas left before grabbing her phone. She tapped a message. "He's gone. See you soon." The reply came instantly. "Already waiting." A slow smile curved her lips. She grabbed her purse and slipped out of the apartment. Across the street, hidden behind the tinted windows of a black sedan, a pair of eyes followed her every move. The man in the driver's seat tapped a cigarette against the steering wheel, watching as she disappeared into a waiting taxi. "Gotcha," he muttered. An unexpected call. Thomas was halfway through his presentation when his phone vibrated. He glanced down. Unknown number. He ignored it. Then it buzzed again. And again. Finally, he stepped out of the meeting room and answered. "Mr. Carter," a gruff voice asked. "Speaking." "Who is this?" A pause. "Then, you might want to know where your wife is right now." Thomas felt the floor drop beneath him. Thomas gripped the phone tighter, his pulse hammering. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded. The voice on the other end was calm, almost detached. "Someone who thought you deserved to know." "Know what?" A low chuckle. "Your wife, Margot. She just left your apartment." "But she's not where you think she is." Thomas clenched his jaw. "Where is she?" "Corner of 5th and Lexington. Cafe Verona." "She's not alone." The line went dead. For a moment, Thomas just stood there, the sounds of the office fading into a dull hum. It could be a prank. A mistake. But a gut feeling, the one he had ignored for weeks, told him otherwise. Without a second thought, he grabbed his coat and walked out of the building. Margot sat by the window, stirring her cappuccino with delicate precision. Across from her, a man in his early 40s leaned forward, speaking in a low voice. He was sharp-dressed, his suit perfectly tailored, his watch gleaming under the cafe's soft light. "Relax," he said smoothly. "You look nervous." Margot exhaled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I hate sneaking around." "You hate getting caught," the man corrected with a smirk. "There's a difference." Margot rolled her eyes. "What if he finds out?" "He won't. Unless you start acting guilty." She bit her lip, glancing at the cafe entrance. "This has to stay between us, Daniel." Daniel leaned back, taking a slow sip of his espresso. "Of course. Just like all the other times." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "This isn't like the other times." "Really?" He raised an eyebrow. "Then why are you still here?" Margot opened her mouth to answer, but before she could, the cafe door swung open. She didn't see him at first, but she felt him. The weight of his presence. A shift in the air. Then, their eyes met. Thomas stood just inside the entrance, his face unreadable. For the first time in years, Margot felt something she hadn't expected. Fear. The moment stretched unbearably. Thomas stood frozen at the entrance, his gaze locked onto Margot's. A dozen emotions flickered across his face, confusion, hurt, anger, but he hid them quickly. Margot felt her throat go dry. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but she forced herself to remain composed. Across from her, Daniel followed her gaze and casually turned, setting his espresso down. Unlike Margot, he looked entirely unfazed. "Thomas," Margot finally said, her voice carefully controlled. "What are you doing here?" Thomas didn't move. His eyes shifted between Margot and Daniel. Then he stepped forward. Slowly. Deliberately. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his voice quiet but sharp. Margot's grip on her cup tightened. Who's your friend?" Thomas interrupted, his tone eerily calm. Daniel leaned back in his chair, offering an easy smile as if this were all perfectly normal. "Daniel Langston." He extended a hand. "And you must be the husband." Thomas ignored the gesture. Margot glanced between them, feeling trapped. "Thomas, please. Can we not do this here?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Where would you prefer we do this, Margot?" People in the cafe were beginning to notice. A few stolen glances, whispers behind coffee cups. Margot felt heat rise to her face. Daniel sighed, adjusting his cufflinks. "All right, this is getting dramatic. Margot, should I give you two a moment?" Thomas clenched his jaw. "No need. We are leaving." Margot hesitated. "Thomas." "Now." For the first time, Daniel's smirk faltered. His eyes flickered toward Margot, silently asking if she wanted him to intervene. She hesitated just a second too long. Thomas turned and walked out, expecting her to follow. And she did. Unspoken words. The walk back to their apartment was silent. The city moved around them, horns blaring, people laughing, the rhythmic hum of life, but between them, there was only tension. Once inside, Thomas closed the door behind them and exhaled sharply. "Tell me the truth, Margot," he said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. "What's going on?" Margot's fingers trembled as she set her purse down. "It's not what you think." Thomas gave a bitter laugh. "Then enlighten me." She swallowed hard. "Daniel is an old friend. We were just catching up." Thomas stepped closer. "And someone thought it was important enough to call me about it." Margot's breath hitched. "What?" "Someone called me, Margot. Told me exactly where to find you." "Who else knows about him?" Her pulse spiked. She had been so careful. Who was watching her? Thomas studied her face. "You don't seem surprised. You seem scared." Margot looked away. "I don't know what you're talking about." A long silence stretched between them. Then Thomas spoke again, his voice lower this time. "Are you having an affair?" Margot's lips parted slightly, but no words came. Because the truth was dangerous. And someone out there was watching. Margot's heart raced and she took an instinctive step back, as if physically distancing herself from the question. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but the words got stuck in her throat. Thomas watched her, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of suspicion and disbelief. The tension between them felt suffocating, as if the very air in the room had thickened with every second. The silence stretched on, unbearable and heavy. Finally, Margot exhaled sharply, as though she'd been holding her breath for far too long. She stopped herself, fighting the truth that hovered on the tip of her tongue. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not what you think. Thomas didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a slow step toward her, his eyes not leaving hers. Then explain it to me, he said, his voice quiet but firm. She swallowed hard, her mind racing for a plausible explanation, but nothing came. The truth was there, sitting between them, and no amount of clever words would change the reality of what she had done. The phone buzzed again. Margot flinched, and Thomas's eyes darted to the device sitting on the coffee table. He stared at it for a moment, his hand clenching into a fist at his side. "Who is it?" he demanded, his voice raw with frustration. Margot glanced at the screen, her face paling. It was an unknown number again, and this time, she was sure who it was. Her stomach twisted into knots. "Don't answer it," Thomas warned, but the words were already out of her mouth. Without thinking, she picked it up. "Margot," a familiar voice purred, cool and composed. "I see you're back home." Her blood ran cold as she recognized the voice of the man from the cafe. Daniel. But why was he calling now? "Listen to me," Daniel continued, his voice low. "You need to handle this quickly. Thomas is asking too many questions. We don't want him getting suspicious, do we?" Margot's grip tightened around the phone as her chest tightened with panic. She looked at Thomas, who was now inches away, his expression darkening with each passing second. "Who is it?" Thomas demanded again, his voice strained with anxiety. Margot stood frozen, the weight of the phone in her hand like a heavy stone. For a moment, she thought of lying, but something inside her told her the truth was about to come crashing down, regardless of how hard she tried to hold it back. "I need to go," she finally whispered into the phone, hanging up before he could say another word. Thomas stepped forward, his gaze locking onto hers. "Who was that?" The fear was no longer just in her chest, it was in her voice. It was nothing. Just a business call, she lied, but even to her own ears, it sounded hollow. Thomas didn't seem convinced. He took a long, slow breath, then stepped toward the door. "I'm going out for a bit. I need to clear my head." "Thomas, wait," Margot said, panic rising in her chest. "Don't leave like this." He paused at the door, his hand gripping the doorknob as he looked back at her, his face conflicted but resolute. "I can't do this anymore, Margot. I don't know what's real anymore." He opened the door and walked out, the cold air of the evening flooding into the apartment. Margot stood motionless, her mind racing. She wanted to chase after him, to beg for him to stay, to make him believe her. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't make a difference. The truth was out, and there was no escaping it now. As the door slammed shut behind him, the phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't hesitate. It was Daniel again. She took a deep breath before answering, her voice trembling. "Are you alone?" Daniel's voice was as smooth as ever, but there was a sharpness to it now, something darker. "Yes," she whispered, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly that her knuckles ached. "Good. You know what needs to be done, right?" Daniel's voice softened, almost soothing, but there was an underlying threat in the calmness. Margot closed her eyes, letting out a shaky breath. She didn't have a choice anymore. She was in too deep. "Yes," she answered quietly. "I'll handle it." "Not anymore." Margot stood there in the silence of their apartment, the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Her heart was racing, her thoughts tangled in a mess of guilt, fear, and regret. She knew she couldn't undo what had already been done, and that thought gnawed at her every second. Her phone buzzed again, breaking the stillness. This time, she didn't even need to look at the screen to know who it was. She felt the pit in her stomach grow deeper as she answered. "Margot," Daniel's voice came through the phone, cold and detached. "It's time." She closed her eyes. She had made this decision a long time ago, but now the reality of it was crushing her. She had let herself get trapped in a web of lies, and now there was no way out. The sound of a car door slamming outside caught her attention, and she quickly glanced out the window. A black sedan was parked across the street, the same one she had seen before. The man in the driver's seat was watching her apartment, his eyes unblinking. She felt a chill run through her. "Don't forget, Margot," Daniel's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You need to handle this. If you don't, things won't just go bad, they'll go really bad." She swallowed hard, clenching her jaw. She had no choice but to play along. For her sake. For Thomas's. For everything she had built. Even if it meant losing it all. Margot took a deep breath, her mind racing for a plan. She couldn't just let him slip away, not without doing what needed to be done. But a small part of her, maybe the last bit of her conscience, hoped that somewhere deep inside, Thomas would find the strength to see the truth. To see her. As the hours passed, she prepared herself. She knew exactly what she had to do. No more lies. No more games. Her phone buzzed once more. It was Thomas. She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen, but the sound of the black sedan's engine revving outside made the decision for her. She quickly set the phone down, her face hardening with resolve. It was too late to turn back. Tonight, everything would change. And Margot knew it would never be the same again.